Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you are joining for the first time, this is part of our e-commerce series for which we meet every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, and we pick one topic related to e-commerce. And we always have a very exciting panel that is willing to share their insights and wisdom with you. For today, we are going to pick the topic called testing, which is probably extremely boring for business users, but it's going to be the foundation for your e-commerce project's success. So we are going to have a lot of fun, discussing all of that. We are going to start with everybody's intro. I'm going to start with my intro first. If you don't know who I am Sam Gupta. I'm your host. I am principal at Elevate IQ. I have roughly 20 years of experience in leading large ERP and digital transformation engagements, focusing primarily on e-commerce. So obviously, this topic is near and dear to my heart. As Elevated, we focus on pre-ERP, phase where we are going to be helping with business case development. It's going to be independent ERP selection, business process re-engineering, and system integration ERP implementation. On that note, I'm actually going to move to Chris for her intro.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. It's great to be on the panel with all of you fine-looking gentlemen here today. I am Chris Harrington, the president of Gen Alpha Technologies. And really, we equip original equipment manufacturers, specialty vehicle, and aftermarket organizations with the digital tools that they need to be successful online, really driving a customer experience for the life of the equipment. So happy to be here. Looking forward to talk about testing.
Okay, amazing. And we are going to have so much fun, Chris. Thank you so much for being here. Eric, I am actually going to move to you next for your intro.
Hi, Sam. My name is Eric Landman. I'm a project manager and e-commerce developer with Earthling Interactive. We're an agency that builds e-com shops and web apps for a variety of clients. I've worked in over 50 e-commerce sites on quite a variety of platforms. I personally am a Magento certified solution specialist and a Shopify partner. So I think this will be an interesting discussion.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Eric. Robert, I'm actually going to move to you next for your introduction, if you don't mind.
Sure. My name is Robert Brown. I am principal of RGB e-commerce consultancy. We specialize in B2C e-commerce and digital strategy and execution. I've been doing this for 20 plus years and love to help organizations with their transformations.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Robert. Michael, can I move to you next for your intro?
Sure. I'm Michael Vax. I'm principal of Commerce is Digital, where I'm providing a commerce training and consulting and helping organizations to upskill their teams in e-commerce, as well as define the roadmap. And before that, for many, many years, I was leading product development efforts and number of e-commerce platform companies like SAP Commerce Cloud, Elastic Pass, and recently Spryker.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Michael. And now I am going to start with our panel discussion. Before we start, I am going to request all the panelists to keep yourself on mute because we are still catching the background noise, and that is probably going to be recorded as part of the episode. So I'll really appreciate if you guys can mute yourself. For the audience, if you are there, if you have any specific questions related to today's topic, make sure you comment and ask questions. We will try our best to cover during the episode. If we are not able to cover, we will get back to you, with your inquiry. So this is your chance to ask all of the questions that you might have. So now I am going to start with the first question with Chris. So Chris, when we look at the differences, and this is the comment that I get from all of my customers when we discuss any of the implementation project. And what that comment is that, I am buying a piece of software. I expect this software to work magically. Why do I need to test? especially for the the e-commerce implementation projects, obviously the testing is going to be super critical for the actual development project, but they are going to be equally critical for the implementation projects as well. So what I am hoping to get from you is going to be really differences into the implementation project and the development project in terms of the skill set. What are going to be the differences and what are going to be the unique challenges in these two situations when you compare them?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Sam. And I guess overall, obviously, we all need to test because we want to make sure the solution we invested all of our time and money in is working, right? It's working according to its expectations. Now, I will say that the difference between, a software that you're using internally versus an external software like e-commerce is really that, right? Your external customers, whether that be your customers, your dealers, your sales force, your agents, your international partners, whoever it is that this solution is open for, they are the ones that are going to be utilizing it. So the testers need to be able to understand the business processes that need to be tested by these users to make sure that they're checking the performance of the site. So the biggest difference, is that this is it's testing the business processes that are customer facing. So that's just the simplified way to say it. And the best way that I can think about the types of different people that should be testing are all of those areas in the organization that have some customer facing responsibility. So again, in original equipment manufacturing, where our space is predominant, we have test users like customer support reps.
Yep.
We have sales reps who are out with customers testing. We have the technical support group. Typically, those are the people who typically get called to help and identify the right component or part that goes into a specific machine. If they are using the website to now do that, they might want to be testing search functionality. They're going to be testing your browse functionality, your categorization, and your attributes. Is it working the way that you had thought about as you set up that design? So all of these different roles may be testing different functionality in the site that is leading to a business expectation or outcome in the form of a business process. Does that make sense, Sam?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much for all of those insights. And I completely agree with you that, the business process, the application of those application of the product is going to be a very different business process than developing those business process inside the product. In my experience, some of the differences that I have personally seen is going to be the amount of budget that you have available in case of product development versus the implementation project. In general, the budget is going to be far lower for the implementation project because the businesses are going to expect that, I am already paying for the licenses. Why do we need to hire these business analysts? Why do we need to hire these testers? Typically, the onus is going to be on the business users to be able to test this, who may not have any sort of either software development or the software implementation background. And that is, in my experience, a big barrier overall, in these two approaches. Would you agree with that? What are your thoughts there, Chris?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, if you're developing an e-commerce site all on your own, obviously that's a very different testing and a different budgeting potentially for that. But if you're working with a site developer who's already developed a platform, they have a lot of testing already built into their solution. They have a connectivity tests, they have redundancy tests, they have security tests, they have all the testing on the back end before it gets to you. You as the customer of that e-commerce solution who have built your URL where your customers are going to come, you're just responsible for testing those business processes.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Eric, I'm actually going to come to you. In your experience, obviously, you are doing a lot of e-commerce implementation projects as well. And when you have to deal with the business users who really don't understand, why testing is going to be important. So in your experience, when you are obviously dealing with your business analyst or the quality analyst who might have a slightly deeper background in that, obviously your life is going to be far easier. So in your experience, what are the differences that you have seen when you are dealing in the implementation project versus the product development project?
Well, about half of our projects are consumer facing. The other half would be B2B sort of sites. In both situations, there's some degree of customization, sometimes a lot of customization and even custom programming that is involved. And usually these sites are quite complex. They might have 30, 40, 50 extensions that may interact in various ways. And it's not, yes, it's off the shelf components that we're using, but they may interact in unpredictable and sometimes not very friendly ways. A small anecdote is the last couple months we've been working with BigCommerce to troubleshoot a middleware solution which wasn't accepting certain types of product configurations. Other ones would work fine, and they weren't being pushed through back to the point of sale system. And this is off the shelf stuff. It should have worked. These are mature pieces of software, but there was some sort of interaction that happened. And you would think that the business owner, which was actually a small shop that sells swimming gear, swimsuits, and not a big company by any means, they're going, this isn't working. This is killing us. Our inventory isn't updating. We're really having a problem here. So you would think that something like this, BigCommerce, a big name, involved, you think all this stuff would work together. These things have been on market for a while. But no, in this case, they didn't. So you have to start with a user persona, work through all of the ways they may use the site, including things like the user groups and pricing and tiered pricing and maybe corporate accounts. You have to set up test accounts for all of this stuff because these various pieces of software, these extensions that add functionality are very complex and they get updated, and sometimes people make mistakes and sometimes they break. So that's why we have to test these things.
Yeah, so obviously, very interesting story there. In some cases, you are going to expect that, you are buying a product and your expectation is going to be that, it's probably going to work for all of your scenarios, especially some of the ones that you might feel that might be common sense. But unless you test a software, it's very, very hard to guarantee whether that is going to work for your use case or not. So typically, in your experience, Eric, when you deal with these situations, is your preference more towards testing yourself, or do you hand over this responsibility to the business user because they are the ones who need to be trained on the software? Your role is more of the educator. So the training component is there as well in case of testing. So do you typically test all by yourself or your team? Or do you typically hand over that responsibility to the business user so they have far deeper understanding of why they are testing, and then they get trained, in the process as well?
Our role is as developers, but also consultative partners.
Yeah.
So we take it upon ourselves to learn our customers' business models and build tests with them and walk through these tests so we can appropriately test a system. But if we just build something and we don't know, for example, that our customers got regional sales managers that need to approve their invoices, and we don't test that, the whole site could not work. So we need to know that as developers and develop the tests with them, and we do that. It's been a very successful model. We can't just throw it at them because, for one reason, another reason, many people are busy. They're just not going to have, we deal with a marketing manager, for example, to build a site, but they're not just going to kick the site over to the sales manager and some regional salespeople to test the site. That's just, nobody has time. They're not professionals in this. They don't know what to look for necessarily. It gets very disjointed. So that's not efficient. So that's why we're involved in the process.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much, Eric, for that. So, Robert, I'm actually going to come to you and I am going to have the follow-up question for you. So, obviously, when you are doing these requirements with the business users, they are always going to have the implied expectations that they will not be able to narrate when they are writing these user stories. And that you are going to be discovering when they are going to be testing it themselves. If you are going to be testing for them, obviously, you will not know those needs. And when it is going to go live, obviously then you will come to know that, okay, this was not working, I was expecting it to work this way, now it is not working, what do I do? So now when you compare the implementation versus the product development projects, have you seen any differences in the implementation scenarios versus the product development?
Oh, absolutely. So there's different stages of testing.
Yeah.
So there's going to be the unit testing. The developers who are doing custom code, they're going to go down there and they're going to test the little pieces of functionality and code snippets to make sure that they work. Then there's going to be, the integrated testing where they marry all those together and it's supposed to be a piece of functionality that's supposed to work. Yep. And then there's going to be QA, and that's handed off to still in the development house. They go back and they took a look at the requirements and they do all the testing based on what they understand. When they've completed that and they're satisfied that they've addressed all of the defects that may be there, because if you're doing development, there's going to be defects, they then hand that off to the users. And that's where UAT comes into place. And that's where the users actually say, hey, I'm going to pretend like I'm a user of this implementation, and I'm going to use it like I think my users do. The project manager's job is to completely disregard what QA has done. That's the development piece. Now you're going to write these scripts from scratch from the user perspective, and you're going to say, hey, I'm going to test this as a user and make sure that it works. And the project manager is going to help. This project manager should be with the client. It shouldn't be the development house. It should be within the client, so the project, because it takes time to develop these testing scenarios. You can use automated testing scenarios. You can use simple Excel spreadsheets, but it's still going to have to be based on a user story, broken down into an individual piece of functionality. So a user story may be something as complex as, I go to the site, I register, I log in, I see my profile, I update my profile and make sure that my account is accurate, and I print out my statements and I log out. Well, each one of those steps is something that you have to verify that actually works. In e-commerce and digital, when it's customer facing, it's more than just testing it that it works. It's also that it tests and works on each individual type of device. Because remember, as consumers, we may be desktop, we may be tablet, we may be iPhone, we may be Android. We're going to use these different devices throughout our day, and we may expect to access this tool anytime during the day on any type of screen. So you have to do multi-screen testing, multi-browser testing to make sure that it works. And that falls on the users. Why? If a customer calls you and says, the site's not working, what do I do? If you haven't tested it, if you haven't learned how it's supposed to work from a user perspective, how are you going to help your customer actually walk through that? If you know it and understand it, you could understand, oh, maybe they're not allowing cookies in. If you allow, if you don't allow cookies, then a piece of the site's not going to work. That's where that important piece comes in. So there's two types of testing that the users will do. There'll be structured testing, where they lay out all their test cases from the user stories, and it's very sequential throughout the entire path. It's very good that there's front-facing customer functions, and then there's back-facing or internal-facing. So if the customer logs in and to their profile, sees something that they like, and they want to purchase it, they get the confirmation that this has in fact been purchased, and then they get the, it's going to be scheduled for delivery. But you also want to make sure that all that information from a user's perspective goes back to the different departments that are actually supposed to get that information and act on it. That's ensuring that all the integrations happen properly, but that still relies on the user teams actually completing those entire transactions on the various screens that the customers will utilize. So that's the very structured testing. The unstructured is, I'm just going to go bounce around and hack around and see what I can try to break and see what kind of trouble I can get into. That's where some of the interesting stuff happens. That's where some of the edge cases or the unexpected things happen that may point to forgotten scenarios like, oh, I didn't think to mention that we had regional supervisors that had to sign off on this. So if the users do the structured and unstructured on multiple screens, on multiple browsers, that takes a lot of time. It takes an experienced digital or e-commerce project manager to help step you through that process. You should cover about 99% of any of the issues that you may run into. That way your dev team can fix them.
Yeah, so I completely agree that, the steps to your testing, the way you mentioned that there's going to be unit testing, then integration testing, then maybe system testing, then finally user acceptance testing, right? But your fundamentals, I mean, when you are going to be unit testing, you are going to be relying on those user stories that you have all of your requirements captured there. Your users really know what they really need from the system. And if they don't really know what they need from the system, obviously your unit tests are not going to be of quality. And then obviously you are not going to be testing the scenario which your users were expecting. In the B2C scenario, typically the workflows are going to be slightly simpler. They are designed to be simple because you are targeting the users that are not going to be as sophisticated with their technical skills. In case of B2B market, when you are dealing with, let's say, the internal customer reps, they have far more complicated workflows because they need to answer customers' inquiries, and it could be fetching some very complex reports. So that requires far deeper testing. And if your customer reps are not really testing and trained, sometimes they might miss the requirement because they are the ones who are actually producing user stories. And then in the implementation project, you are not probably going to have as much experience either, of the consultant, because they are just not as experienced with the software projects. So
let me give you a story that would relate directly to this. So I was working for a major hotel chain.
Yeah.
The director of distribution. So in the hotel chains, you have all these independent hotels that are flagged as the hotel around the country.
Yeah.
And so there's a commission, there's a fee that occurs between that hotel and the major brand, or if the customer purchases on the major brand website, then they have to send those funds to the customer. So that exchange at the time when I did this happened every week. It happened Sunday night. So Monday morning, the franchisee could come in and they could see, yes, I've got these funds in my account so I can pay my bills. And it was a very manual process. So the head of the department called in the IT group and said, you know what, I want to try to automate this because we've got a lot of mistakes and there's a lot of touch points in here. Can we automate this? So we took the requirements from the head of the department. He did not want us talking to the field workers. He did not want us talking to the reps that actually took the phone calls. So fine. So we wrote the requirements. He signed off on them. We built exactly what he had told us. And he said, okay, I want you to go live on this day. Do you want to test it first? Nope, we're fine. Just go live.
Yep.
We went live. And what do you think happened?
It's going to be fun.
So they were inundated with about 500 phone calls from franchisees that didn't get their money.
Yep.
And he was screaming mad. Come to find out that the phone reps actually had done adjustments manually all along that were never documented, that he didn't know. They just magically made it work. And so we had to roll back the entire thing because he thought he knew when in fact he did not.
Yeah, and this is the real story. This is the reality of most implementation projects, to be honest. Unless you involve your users during the testing, they have to test to be able to know, and you have to watch them test. And that is the only way to know what they are doing, because they're not going to tell you everything. They're just going to, it's easy. I don't have time. This is all easy. Just go figure it out. And then you are going to have a lot of fun once you go live. Thank you so much, Robert, for that. Michael, I'm actually going to come to you. I don't know if you're able to relate with the stories. Do you agree, disagree with anything that you have seen so far? What would be your perspective in differentiating the implementation versus the development project and their test strategies?
I think Robert and Chris and Eric already covered a lot of good points. Definitely agree with Robert that using different devices and coverage is just very difficult to achieve. You will never find a developer, at least in the last 10 years, who is using Internet Explorer. It's really will be offended if you ask them to use Windows and Internet Explorer. Yeah, but we all know that, especially in some IT organizations, in big organization, they maybe IT dictates what browser to use. Yeah. So of course, usually when I'm running the product, I prefer that it's still tested before. One thing that we were doing before, we were basically just assigning different browser to different member of development team and saying using that. So at least give some initial coverage. Yeah. But one thing that also I think Robert, examples that you gave was that in many cases businesses actually don't know the requirements. They don't know the existing processes.
Yep.
Especially when they haven't had e-commerce before and then implementing it now. There's several things happening. First of all, they definitely have some dirty data or dirty processes, I call them, where, as in Robert's example, they're fixing something manually, or somebody put something in the system. It was 15 years ago. Nobody touched it then. Nobody can explain what it is. But it works because, again, internal people are trained and so on. So one of the kind of best practice is actually try to involve users from very, very beginning in even writing requirements, and definitely in participating in development team. We usually work in agile manner, so there's kind of every 2 weeks some demos happening, so users actually need to go and accept stories and all of that. It's not user acceptance testing on a kind of going live, but it gives these users into the process, into understanding what we're implementing, and we're getting this feedback much earlier. And earlier you're getting this, the better. Doesn't mean that everything will be caught, but definitely helpful. The other thing is that it's a difference between staging system and production system. This is kind of where a lot of things happening is before staging data and production data and kind of full flow. Also, as e-commerce provider, you may not actually have access to all systems. Like you actually are not going to have access to ERP if you are implementing e-commerce system, but guess what? Orders go there. Yeah, and then again, there may be a difference between data, different conflicts between different systems. Some orders may pass through, some orders may not pass through. So I think that in user acceptance testing, it's very important to cover all systems involved into this, from basically there's a storefront, there's e-commerce, there's some backends, there's order management system, maybe warehouse management system, ERP, content management system. And I'm not even talking about a bunch of marketing automation, exporting your products to Google or Amazon and so on. So user acceptance testing is really important to see this big picture and making sure that you're covering it with your test.
Okay, some very important points there, Michael, and you are absolutely right that business users are not going to know everything, and that's going to be a discovery process that you have to go through to be able to know, what they might be implying or what they might not be able to narrate in terms of the requirements. The other comment that you made about the agile, and I actually like the agile methodology a lot. The biggest, problem or the interesting thing that I find with agile is every company that you go to, the agile is probably going to look different because it's just so loose in terms of the recommendations and the prescriptions. So here's my problem with the approach. Okay, so let's say if I'm going to an implementation, I went to a implementation. I went there and I am asking, okay, give me, whatever you have done implementation, you are live right now. You must have documented something, right? You must have those documents. They said, no, we don't have documentation. We follow agile here. And I was like, okay, I get it. You follow agile, but you don't have any requirements. What are you talking about? So they said that, you know what? We simply create the user stories and the epic right on, something like Trello or Jira. And that's it. That's what we have. So now, if I want to come in the project after 9 months, what am I doing here? I'm actually going in Jira and trying to figure out how to get the 30,000 foot view of the business. So I am not sure where sometimes people feel that, if they are following the agile, then they don't have to capture the requirement and they have to simply miss the requirement phase. In case of implementation as well, the requirement phase is going to be absolutely critical. So, Michael, what would be your recommendation in this particular case? Do companies that are following agile and they are directly moving to your Jira or Trello, is that a good idea, or do they need to go through the requirement phase?
I think what you described is a case when people have extremely simplified view of agile. And I was doing really participating in agile movement for the last 15 years, and at some point, I also was organizing conferences and presenting on them. And a title of one of my talk on the conference was a straight jacket of agile iteration. And basically, I was president of Agile Association at that time, but I really was frustrated by exactly the things that you are saying, that people are just simplifying agile to the point of not making sense. Yeah, because there's a big difference in projects that you're doing. Let's say Sam and me, we started startup and we're sitting in one room and we are building software. We probably don't need even Jira. I think whiteboard will be okay for us. Yeah. But we're talking about super complex project, and you can apply this. You can apply agile principles, but not we need to apply different processes for this. There's multiple agile processes for much more complex implementation. Yeah, like Scale Agile or Scale Agile framework or many other. And you really need to agile is just your toolkit for me. And then I'm looking at the project. How big is the project? Am I in full control of the project? Am I working with customer? Am I developing flight like flight control system or website? I don't want to have agile on flight support system. I better use waterfall with all testing as I can, because I don't want to get on this flight if it wasn't tested properly. Yeah. So it's really very contextual, and art is to apply right technique, right level of requirement documentation, right level of testing, depending on what software you're doing, what environment you're doing, for what organization you're doing. Yeah. So agile does not mean you're not writing requirements. That's absolutely not the case.
Chris, go ahead. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic. And I think some advice that I might give organizations is to make sure that your business users participate in the scope of work.
Yep.
So the work of writing those requirements, because that's typically in a good business process, they're going to take that scope of work. That's going to define the requirements, the use cases, and then you transfer that into the work that the developers are going to do. And then you should be testing after the developers do the work, those test cases you define in the scope of work. So I think as an organization, if you can be a part of that and you can sign off on the scope of work before the development starts, then you can have iterative releases to test portions of that scope of work. But at least that scope of work has been agreed. That's something that we have seen. And I really liked, so I think what Michael brought up about that was really important, but also the staging areas. We have, with our product, we do integrate our QA environment to the test ERP environment. And oftentimes we have seen this before, the ERP test environment data is outdated. So production data in the ERP does not match test data. So when you're testing in QA, if it's really old and outdated data, things can either pass or fail, just because of that outdated data. So I always encourage now a refresh of your ERP test data so that you've got the latest data when you're doing that QA testing, just to advance when your product moves into production. But good comments there.
Eric, go. You have a comment?
Yeah, a couple things. Michael's point about staging and production data is very well taken. I want to point out, though, that typically we build sites in open source platforms where it's really not that hard to set up a development site. But if you're using a SaaS platform like Shopify or BigCommerce or one of those, it's actually not all that easy to set up a development site that is related to the production site. It's quite a lot of extra work. So just because you think you've got this great platform that does all these cool things doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy to work with. Then switching gears to the user stories, when we approach this, we do usually the first part of the project, or more typically as a separate project, is a strategy and evaluation where we define the users and the roles and the user stories. And we talk about testing and the types of data that are passed back and forth. And so that is very heavily developed with not only our direct client, but maybe we have field personnel or system admins or sales reps or whoever we need to bring into the process to get a clearer picture of the data as we need to.
Yeah, could not agree. Thank you so much. Robert, go for your comment. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I want to add a couple of things. One, in the testing, so many things that we've been talking about here are what we would consider just kind of normal, but this is for the uninitiated who, this may be the first time that they're hearing it. So when you are actually doing testing, there's actually an entire process around logging the issues that you find. And so when you start that testing process, you actually have to sit down and agree what that logging process is, what the level of severity is, how you're going to report that. You don't want users to say, everything is a showstopper and I can't move forward. I've had that. So, one day they logged 300 defects and every single one of them was a showstopper, and it's because they didn't clearly communicate to one of their team members what that criteria was. Is one of the criteria could be, okay, this needs to be fixed, but it can be fixed after we go live. One of them is, it's pretty important, but it's not a showstopper. A showstopper means we literally cannot move forward in our testing process, and we have to have that fixed now so we can complete our testing. That's one piece of it. The other piece of it is, we're talking about writing these requirements, and I think it was a really great point that Michael brought up about the disconnect between true agile or true waterfall and what some organizations are implementing now in a very simplified version. Part of it, I think, is their limited experience with bigger projects, and part of it may be they are trying to save money. And one of the things that organizations need to be aware of is, when you write these contracts and the delivery process is based on a successful delivery of the tool, if 6 months from now the scenario pops up that it's broken and you didn't test for it because you didn't want to put the time or money or effort into building the test cases and actually testing it, it's not going to be on your delivery partner to go back and fix it. So it's actually an insurance policy for yourself to make sure that the delivery of the product that you get works satisfactorily, so you're happy and your customers are happy, and you have a great relationship with your development partner.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Robert, for that. So now we are going to actually be discussing the next segment, which is really critical, and that was probably the core, topic for today's conversation. That is going to be really that art of writing the test cases. In my experience, just because I grew up as the software guy, for me the testing actually comes naturally. I don't have to think about it. But lately, when I am interacting with business users, I have come to realize that the teaching testing could be a terribly difficult task. I'll give you some examples, Chris, and I'm actually going to come to you for the question. And the question is going to be, so here's the example. I am working in a project, and they have created this giant list of test cases. And the test case says, hey, create 5 sales orders. There's nothing else in that. That's a test case. Create 5 sales orders. Okay. What is the acceptance criteria? The sales orders need to be created. Now, you are going to be asking question, okay, why are you creating these 5 sales orders? Is there any variation between those two, sales orders? Are you trying to test a specific condition that you are, and then have you thought about these boundary cases? So honestly speaking, I mean, when I talk to these, people who might have, let's say, 5 years in the, IT, but they really struggle to write the test cases, their comment is going to be, hey, can you provide a framework? I personally don't know if a framework exists. So now let's say if you were to coach, Chris, to anybody who's thinking from the testing perspective, especially if you are training these sales users or the marketing users who have never done any software development in their life, and now they need to think like a tester, how would you coach them?
Well, one piece of advice that I would give any organization is to ask the vendor you're working with for some example test cases that they've used with other customers, because the vendor that you're working with should be qualified to do this. Test scripts are really typically a part of any project implementation, and the steps of every test need to be fully documented. So if you think about a user story, writing user stories is one thing. So typically as a user story is, as an A, I want to do B so that I can C. Okay, that's your test. That's your user story, is typically doing something like that. So I'm an internal user. I want to be able to change my customer number so that I can see a customer pricing for the person I'm on the phone with. That could be the user story, but that is not the test script. Okay, the test script will be the steps for how does an internal user log in? So they have to log in, and then they have to look at the upper right-hand corner and see their account area. They have to click on the account area and see where they can change their customer number. They change the customer number. It has to have test data, and it should be real data. So which customer account data do you want them to enter there so that they're changing that account number, right? So, and they're testing the validity of each of these steps. This is the process of writing a test script. Yes, I changed my customer account number. That customer account number then came up. Now I'm going to search for a part number. Go to the search bar, search for a part number. Click on the part number. The part number gives you pricing. Validate that pricing in your ERP system matches the account number you changed in your e-commerce site. So there are these steps in the validation. And then as you mentioned, Sam, there's an expected outcome. So the test has to write what that expected outcome is as well. And then there should be a pass-fail for each step. Okay, so this is the writing of test scripts. I will tell you, it's extremely painful. As a development company, we have to do this, right? So we do this for our product, and then we do it for the customizations that Eric mentioned earlier. So when we're working with a customer who has a new customization that is outside of the standard implementation, we have to write the test script that are all of the steps that a user would do in order to get to an expected outcome, and each of those steps has to be validated. And then the pass-fail it gets sent back to the development company so that they can see what things need to then be repaired as bug fixes or what's not working. And that's really the structured tests. So to go back to something Robert said earlier, these are all the structured test things that we can think of. One thing I'll mention to everybody, and I know the people here will understand this, but for anybody listening, there's a very different understanding that an organization goes through from discovery when you're defining your e-commerce environment, what your scope is, what it's going to do, all of the different roles, all of the different personas, what a logged in user can do versus a non-logged in user, what they can see and do. All these things have to be tested. But when it gets into the actual user's hands, now you're in UAT, there they're going to start going through the test scripts. Now they're going to understand truly how the product is working and how it's functioning with their data. That's when the unstructured tests start to take place. Those are test scripts that a developer sometimes doesn't even know how to help you write, or hasn't written for you, because these are scenarios that didn't even come out in the discovery section. They are things that those business users really know. Oh, this customer account, when they choose this transport mode with this transport method, this fee has to be added. If we wouldn't know that necessarily that fee gets added, it should come over through the integration. That's something that user needs to test. So that I'm just applying the structured versus unstructured in some of the things that we've seen. And that's where I say the business users, when they go through this very scripted testing, they begin to understand the product, and now they can try to break the product with all the additional things that they know how the business process should work for their customer. So.
Okay, amazing. So in the interest of time, we are not taking any comments. We are going to do just one round. So Eric, do you want to go with the question? And that is going to be, how would you coach someone how to write the test cases? What are some of the best practices that you have seen in writing the test cases, in thinking, from the system perspective, the way it should be tested?
Yeah, sure. What Chris said was fantastic. That was a very nice exposition. I would and do counsel them to get the users involved and to see how they function with the system. And then we will write a test case. And when we say write a test case, there are automated or semi-automated tools, I should say semi-automated tools that we use that can do things like assist with login, so that always the same test user ID and password and email is used, and the same product is purchased. And that can come back and bite you, though, if you're not careful. So, but then it requires human interaction. When this transaction is done, the test tool can't reach out to somebody's email and see if they got the email that they're supposed to get, and it can't look at the email and see that it really had the correct products and the correct pricing and the correct lead time. So there is some element of checklists involved. So did the transaction go through? Log into the credit card gateway. Were the funds captured? Somebody has to physically do that. So when we write the script, it's partly an automated thing, but it's also a checklist of this list of things at these particular times in the process, and make certain that it happened. And if it didn't happen, that's when you throw a flag and say, no, here's where it died. Something didn't happen. The credit card gateway didn't clear the transaction. Maybe there was an error thrown or something like that. So that's the point where that test fails, or maybe needs to be modified. Maybe they got the email and it wasn't the right email. Maybe it said the wrong thing. So I was kind of rambling on there. Does that answer the question there?
It does. Thank you so much, Eric.
Okay, sure.
So, Robert, I'm actually going to come to you. So if you want to cover your comment right now, you can cover that, or you can talk about how would you coach somebody how to write these test cases?
Sure. So the way that I help them write the test cases is they have to put themselves in the shoe of the actual user. And, it's kind of like when you write, when you're writing a paragraph, your best writing comes with how you talk. So you talk yourself through, okay, I need to log in, you write that down. I need to check my account balance, you write that down. So it's a very natural process. Then you actually step through that process to make sure that you haven't missed anything. One of the things that I want to add in here is we've all been talking about the happy path of test cases, that we're all going towards the positive example. We also need to write the negative cases that we need to test. So what happens if I enter in a bad password? Does it acknowledge that I enter a bad password? What happens if I enter it 3 times? It'll lock me out of the system. What happens if I can't spell correctly? Does it help me find what I'm looking for? So yes, you want to test to make sure that the product works the way that you want, but you also have to account for the fact that people can't spell and they have fat fingers on little keyboards. And so there's misspellings and typos that happen all the time. What does your system do when it encounters that?
Okay, amazing. So the only comment I am going to have there is going to be, there might be a lot of people who might be powerful speakers, but when it comes to writing, it's extremely difficult. And the same thing goes for testing as well. Okay, you might find it very easy just because you have a very deep software development background, but writing those scenarios, finding those boundary conditions, thinking more from the process perspective, unless you are an engineer, because engineers are really wired to think from the process, from the blocks perspective. They can do problem diagnoses. They can, take the step-by-step approach, the structured thinking approach. Sometimes finance people can do that as well. But, for others, they really struggle in that. I don't know if you're going to have any follow-up comments there, Robert, or...
No, you're right. I've been talking from experience with people who are used to doing this. Fortune 5,000 companies maybe don't have that experience. They don't have an IT department. They don't have, their users that we've been talking about typically have a full-time day job. And this may be the first time that they're ever doing this. And it's going to be in the company's best interest and for the employee morale and success of the project to get some outside expertise to help them through this process. So to get some analysts to help write these things, to get some project managers that are used to doing this to help guide them to writing these. Because if you just bring in a development firm and you're not provided that guidance, what you're going to get is not what you're hoping for.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Robert. So, Michael, now you are going to be coaching. You can disagree or agree with anything that has been said so far, or you can cover your advice about how you are going to coach somebody, how to really think from that perspective of a tester.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think everybody really had a lot of suggestions, so I'm not trying I won't repeat them. They all are very valid, and I recommend to everybody who are listening, try them out and do it. But to add to this, I think that one thing that really separates good test case is that it's repeatable and reliable. And in order to do this, really all tests should be independent. And you achieve it by making sure that each test creates its own data and then cleans after itself. Then you can run this test repeatedly. You can do them in any order. You can distribute them between multiple people who are testing, because it's quite possible that one test may destroy data that needed to other tests, or vice versa. And you having a lot of false positives, and you're spending a lot of time on this. And I think that really, if business users are tasked with this, they need to get some training. They need to get some advice from people who are really experienced, like people on this call and so on. And just one more thing to add, that we're dealing with e-commerce here. And one thing we shouldn't forget is usability. Because even smallest changes on your site can really affect your financial results. So I think there should be usability testing. You should think about usability. And you should do A/B testing to test how user reacts. And yes, you can cover a lot with your own internal testing, but at the end, users are still going to find something different. And so also what we always recommend our customers, that is to select your pilot project. For example, right now I'm working with the customers. They are in they have stores, online stores in several different countries, and saying, okay, what the store has a minimum amount of functionality. We're doing replatforming, so the fastest we can go put online, and doesn't really, it's not the main revenue driver. Select it. Let's prepare for this for functionality required for this store. Let's go live, but only live for this store. And then we can reverse back, because you're always going to, especially if you're doing completely new system, you're always going to find something in production as well. Doesn't matter how good your test case is. It's just level of complexity businesses are dealing with is really huge. And so that's basically would be my advice on approach testing.
Okay, very interesting. So I'm going to have one follow-up question for you. So I completely agree with you that, the test cases that you are going to write, they need to be repeatable, reliable, and the independent. Now, when you are testing these B2C applications, when you have to test, let's say, the compatibility across browsers, the test case, the scope of the test case is probably going to be limited. But if you are working on a very complex e-commerce applications, for example, what Gen Alpha does, right? There are going to be millions of variables in every scenario. So how do you write the test case for those scenarios? Because you have to do the data setup that are going to have a lot of prerequisite before the test case can be successful. Now, if the test case need to be dependent, what would be your advice in sort of creating the framework to capture all of these data points and the prerequisite for the test cases?
Because you're absolutely right. The other characteristic of good test set is that it's fast.
Yeah,
it's easy to execute because, again, as people mentioned here, nobody has time, and also time is money in many cases. So usually, I think what we'll do, in my experience, come more from running big development organization when I don't know, like 100 developers. But when you're going online, complex applications, and you need to have different level of tests. You need to have full set of tests, and you also need to have some smaller set of tests that you're running. Doesn't matter what. When you are doing the smallest change, even like nothing changed, but you still do this sanity check before you go live. You can automate as much as possible. But my main advice when here automation is don't automate more tests that you can maintain. Because especially with these scripting tools, people are really going, oh, I can record tests very quickly. The question is, if this test is not reliable, if the test is going to break on different browser or different weather or whatever happened, then you're actually adding more load on yourself. So automate well, automate the most important passes, and then you basically invest your time smoothly, and then you can have this automation testing running every time. Then you can have selective testing, depending, let's say you change order flow, and then you're only going to test this order flow during this time. And at some point, you need to do full testing, depending on changes, what you do. So there's different things, and we haven't even talked about other very complex things like performance testing or security testing. Yeah, and that's for e-commerce, it's a must. For security testing, I basically don't do it yourself. None of us have experience. Go to professional, pay the money, they do it for you. Yeah, and then you fix it, and then you also should ask the same security company to run the security test every quarter, because your software doesn't stay the same even you haven't changed the thing. There's a lot of libraries, a lot of layers of software. Something changed. Some of these Log4j bugs that was recently discovered. It's, some open source software found new bugs there. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. So the only thing we can take right now is going to be the super short closing advice. Chris, what would be your closing advice?
After you've done all your testing, soft launch to a group of testers that are externally to your organization. It's a great way to just validate things are working before you open it up to everyone.
Could not agree more. Thank you so much. Eric, what would be your closing advice?
I would say when you're developing the site or updating the site, make sure that you involved as deeply as you can the people who are using the site, so they know they have all the detail with how things work and how things should work, and maybe they're doing things in the background that you didn't discover before, and that will uncover that.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much, Eric. Robert, what would be your closing advice?
For small organizations, I would suggest that you get outside help outside of the development agency to help coach and guide your team through this process. That way you ensure that your team stays happy and you have a good relationship with your developer and you get what you need.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Robert, for that. Michael, what would be your closing advice?
I think I run out of advice. I already mentioned most of the things during just actually answering the last question. But definitely I want to say that don't do it on your own. Always involve people who actually have experience in doing the testing. They don't necessarily should do testing for you, but should be your coach, your advisor, your support. It's a discipline. It requires not only skills and experience, but also special type of character. Like, for example, I used to be a good developer, but I'm not a good tester. Yeah. So you really need to get professionals. This is very serious area. Software is extremely complex. Doesn't matter how you buying it, you modifying it. It's just very complex world, and invest in testing.
Okay, amazing, guys. That's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our e-commerce series for which we meet each Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to e-commerce. We always have a very exciting panel for you. So make sure you are not going to miss next week's show. We are going to be here. On that note, I really want to thank everyone for their time and insights today.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.